This is the story of humanity's greatest discovery and its most terrifying mistake. It begins, as most such stories do, with a desperate search for answers, and ends with something that can barely be understood, let alone survived. The year is 2273. Humanity has colonized a fraction of its own solar system, constructing orbiting cities around Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. But beyond that, space remains an uncharted void. Science probes have been launched to other star systems, but data takes years, sometimes decades, to return. In the search for extraterrestrial life, every discovery is monumental, but none had prepared us for what we found orbiting Gliese 581. The Gliese system is roughly 20 light-years from Earth, a distance just within the reach of humanity's long-range exploration technology. It was there that the HSS Vanguard, a deep space research vessel, stumbled upon the anomaly. At first, it seemed like a gas giant, larger than Jupiter, shrouded in emerald and amber clouds that swirled with unnerving symmetry. But what was peculiar wasn't the planet itself, but the faint pulse emanating from it. A rhythmic thrum that oscillated in perfect intervals, detectable even from millions of kilometers away. The Vanguard team joked at first, calling it the heartbeat of a god. But as the ship closed in, what began as a joke became something more sinister. The readings were consistent with life, vast planetary life. The planet wasn't just alive. It was aware. Dr. Elena Faraday, a biologist and exobiologist, had been among the first to suggest investigating Gliese 581g, the name eventually assigned to the heartbeat planet. She was also the one who would later regret it most. We assumed the pulse was some kind of natural phenomenon. Her later recordings would state, her voice hollow, laden with something between guilt and exhaustion. We hoped that maybe it was geothermal activity or a magnetic field interacting with its moons. But the patterns were too regular, too perfect. It wasn't random noise. It was intentional. It was deliberate. The decision was made to approach and orbit the planet for a detailed scan. As the Vanguard descended into Gliese 581g's orbit, something strange happened to the crew. Almost everyone reported vivid, unsettling dreams of incomprehensible shapes twisting through dark waters, of distant worlds overrun with writhing organic forms. But dreams were just the beginning. The team launched a series of drones into the upper atmosphere to collect samples. The first sign of trouble came when one of the drones returned, moving in a way it shouldn't have. It twitched and writhed as though alive, its metal framework pulsating with a slick, membranous coating that seemed to grow over it like a fungus. Dr. Faraday was the first to examine the drone samples, placing fragments of the biological coating under a high-powered microscope. What she saw chilled her to the core. The cells weren't just alive, they were self-replicating. Worse, they exhibited behavior far beyond the capacity of any microorganism humanity had ever encountered. The cells seemed to observe their surroundings, then adapt to them with startling efficiency. "It's almost as if they're sentient," Faraday whispered, staring into the microscope. "They're looking back at me." By the time she raised her head, it was already too late. The first crew member to exhibit symptoms was Lieutenant James Clark, a former engineer who'd been stationed in the atmospheric lab. He came to the medbay complaining of severe headaches, joint pain, and nausea. When Dr. Faraday examined him, she noticed an odd discoloration spreading beneath his skin, a sickly, greenish hue, like algae blooming inside his veins. "It's probably some kind of pathogen," she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "We'll quarantine him until we figure this out." But the symptoms progressed faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within hours, Clark's skin began to peel, revealing tissue that glistened unnaturally, almost crystalline. His voice grew distorted, words gurgling out as though his vocal cords were submerged in liquid. "I can hear it," Clark muttered over and over. "It's speaking to me. It's inside me." He died screaming. Clark wasn't the last. Within 24 hours, half the crew began exhibiting similar symptoms. Those unaffected were horrified as their colleagues began to change, their bodies warping in grotesque and alien ways. One woman's arms elongated, the bones cracking and reforming into spindly, insect-like appendages. Another man's torso split open, revealing a writhing mass of translucent, eel-like organisms. But the most horrifying change wasn't physical, it was psychological. The infected began to speak in unison, their voices overlapping, merging into a single, otherworldly chorus. "The womb awakens," they chanted, their distorted faces turned toward the observation window. "The mother will birth her children. You cannot stop her. None of you can." The remaining crew, those still human, were desperate to escape. Captain Darius Harlan, a no-nonsense leader with over 30 years of service, ordered the ship to withdraw from orbit. But Gliese 581G had other plans. As the Vanguard attempted to fire its engines, the planet's atmosphere shifted. A massive tendril of luminous, organic material erupted from the planet's surface, wrapping itself around the ship like a constrictor snake. The crew watched in horror as the tendril pulsed with life, sending surges of energy into the vessel's systems. The ship's lights flickered, and a low, droning hum filled every corridor. "It's feeding," Dr. Faraday realized, her voice trembling. "It's using us to fuel itself." One by one, the remaining crew members began to succumb. Not to infection, but to despair. Captain Harlan, in a last-ditch effort to save the mission's data, ordered Dr. Faraday to eject the ship's black box, a small probe designed to preserve information in the event of catastrophe. "Someone needs to know what happened here," he said, his voice grim, "even if it's the last thing we do." As Faraday sealed the black box and prepared to launch it, she noticed something strange. Outside the observation window, the swirling clouds of Gliese 581G began to shift, parting to reveal a structure buried within the planet's gaseous layers. A vast, pulsating mass of biological material. It wasn't a planet at all. It was an egg. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Gliese 581G was no mere celestial object. It was alive. It was gestating. And its children, the horrors spawned from its depths, were already spreading. Faraday barely had time to launch the black box before the infection reached her. Her last moments were a blur of pain and terror, her mind consumed by the same voice that had spoken through Clark and the others. "The womb will open," it whispered. "The galaxy will be reborn." Somehow, the black box made it back to Earth. The message it carried, the final log of the Vanguard crew, was dismissed as a hoax by most scientists. But the dreams began shortly afterward. People across the planet reported seeing the same thing. A vast, green planet throbbing with life, and a voice calling to them from the void. Humanity had peered into the abyss, and the abyss had peered back. The black box from the HSS Vanguard should have been a warning, a scream from the edge of oblivion, urging humanity to stay away. But warnings, as history has shown, are rarely heeded. It wasn't long before curiosity turned to obsession. Despite the horrifying accounts recorded by the Vanguard crew, the United Interstellar Authority, UIA, launched another mission, this time with a larger team, better equipment, and stricter containment protocols. Their justification was simple. The anomalies of Gliese 581G represented a threat to humanity's survival. Ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. In secret, however, the mission was about more than just understanding the phenomenon. There were whispers in darkened rooms, deals struck between shadowy corporations and desperate governments. If the biological matter retrieved by the Vanguard was truly as adaptive and powerful as it seemed, it could revolutionize medicine, energy, even military technology. The new ship, Horizon Dawn, was equipped with state-of-the-art defenses, a team of the best scientists and engineers humanity could offer, and a crew sworn to secrecy. But all their expertise, all their technology, would prove meaningless against what awaited them. Dr. Aidan Locke stood in the observation deck of the Horizon Dawn, staring out into the infinite black. He was a quiet man, lean and intense, with a sharp mind and an unshakable resolve. He'd reviewed the Vanguard logs obsessively, memorizing every detail of the crew's descent into madness. But what disturbed him most wasn't the accounts of infection or the grotesque transformations. It was the way the crew described the planet itself. as if it were aware, as if it had a purpose. "This isn't just an anomaly," Locke had said during the pre-mission briefing. "It's a living entity. If we're not careful, we could be dealing with something far beyond our understanding." His warnings were met with polite nods and thinly veiled skepticism. The mission's commander, Colonel Miriam Voss, was a practical woman, more concerned with results than speculation. "We're here to gather data and samples, Doctor," Voss had replied curtly, "not indulge in metaphysical debates." As the horizon dawn approached Gliese 581G, the planet loomed large on their monitors. A swirling storm of green and amber clouds, pulsing faintly like the steady beat of a colossal heart. The crew was uneasy, though few admitted it aloud. Strange things began happening almost immediately. The ship's long-range scanners malfunctioned, their readings scrambled by an unknown interference. Communications with Earth became distorted, voices on the other end garbled and indistinct. And then there were the dreams. Dr. Locke was among the first to experience them. He dreamed of vast, alien landscapes teeming with impossible life, towering spires of flesh and bone, rivers of phosphorescent liquid teeming with writhing shapes. He saw creatures crawling across the surfaces of distant moons, their bodies merging and splitting in endless, grotesque cycles of growth. But the worst part was the voice. It wasn't a sound, exactly, but a presence. A feeling that coiled around his mind, whispering in a language he couldn't understand, yet somehow felt true. When Locke woke, he was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. He tried to dismiss it as stress, a product of his overactive imagination. But when he glanced at the others during the morning briefing, he saw the same haunted look in their eyes. The mission proceeded despite these warning signs. The Horizon Dawn deployed a series of unmanned probes into the planet's atmosphere, each one equipped with reinforced containment units and advanced analysis tools. The first probe returned with a sample of the planet's atmosphere, a viscous, greenish mist that seemed to shimmer in the light. Under a microscope, the mist revealed itself to be teeming with life. Microscopic organisms that moved with an eerie purpose, forming complex patterns before breaking apart and reassembling. "It's like they're communicating," Locke observed, his voice tinged with awe and unease. Another probe descended deeper, penetrating the thick cloud layers to capture high-resolution images of the planet's surface. What it sent back defied comprehension. Vast, organic structures sprawled across the landscape, pulsating with light and motion. They resembled a cross between coral reefs and insect hives, but on a planetary scale. And then there were the tendrils, colossal, undulating appendages that extended from the surface and writhed through the atmosphere. Some were miles long, their translucent surfaces glowing with bioluminescent veins. "It's not a planet," Locke whispered, echoing Dr. Faraday's final realization. "It's a womb." The first death came 3 days later. Lieutenant Cara Mendez, a technician assigned to monitor the atmospheric lab, was found in her quarters with her eyes missing. Her body was twisted in an unnatural position, her limbs contorted as though she'd been frozen mid-seizure. The security footage offered no answers. One moment, Mendez was sitting at her workstation, her face blank and pale. The next, she began to convulse, clutching at her head as if trying to tear something out of her skull. Then, without warning, she collapsed. The medical team conducted an autopsy, but the results were inconclusive. There were no signs of external trauma, no detectable toxins or pathogens. Her brain, however, showed signs of advanced degeneration, as if it had been consumed from within. "She was fine yesterday," muttered one of the technicians, his voice trembling. "She was fine, but she wasn't fine." None of them were. Over the next few days, the symptoms spread. Crew members reported migraines, hallucinations, and a persistent ringing in their ears. Some claimed to hear voices, whispers echoing through the corridors, calling their names in the dark. Then the physical changes began. Ensign Mark Rourke was the first to show visible symptoms. During a routine maintenance check, he collapsed, his body convulsing violently. When the medics arrived, they found his skin covered in strange, geometric patterns. Intricate, glowing lines that seemed to pulse in time with the planet's heartbeat. Rourke regained consciousness hours later, but he was no longer the man they knew. His eyes had turned a milky white, and his voice was distorted, layered with a low, resonant hum. "They're coming," he whispered, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. "The children of the womb. You can't stop them." By the time the security team restrained him, it was clear he was no longer human. Panic set in. Colonel Voss ordered the ship to withdraw from orbit, but just like the Vanguard before them, they found themselves trapped. The planet's tendrils had extended upward, intertwining with the ship's systems. Every attempt to fire the engines or sever the connection resulted in catastrophic system failures. "It's holding us here," Locke said, his voice shaking. "It's not just alive, it's intelligent. It wants us here." Desperation gave way to infighting. Some argued for abandoning the mission and fleeing in escape pods, while others insisted on finding a way to destroy the planet. But it didn't matter. Gliese 581G was already inside them, its influence spreading like a virus. The infected crew members began to change faster. Their bodies twisted and stretched, their flesh hardening into chitinous shells. They moved in jerky, unnatural ways, their voices merging into a single, unholy cacophony. "The womb must open," they chanted, their milky eyes glowing. "The children must be born." Dr. Locke retreated to the lab, desperate to find a solution. He worked tirelessly, analyzing the samples and searching for a way to neutralize the infection. But the deeper he delved, the more he realized the horrifying truth. The infection wasn't a disease. It was a transformation. The planet wasn't just gestating, it was seeding. The creatures it spawned weren't invaders. They were emissaries, sent to prepare other worlds for the arrival of the mother. And Earth was next. Dr. Aidan Locke sat alone in the lab, the hum of failing equipment a low dirge around him. The rest of the Horizon Dawn had descended into chaos. The infected crew were no longer recognizable as human. They crawled and skittered through the ship's corridors, hunting the uninfected like predators stalking prey. Locke's hands trembled as he recorded his final observations. His voice, hoarse from lack of sleep and the acrid air of the ship's failing life support, was calm but hollow, as though all the fight had drained out of him. "This is Dr. Aidan Locke, chief biologist aboard the Horizon Dawn. The infection is total. It's not a pathogen, not a virus. It's a design, pattern. The planet's biological matter contains information code that rewrites our DNA, reshaping us into something alien. This is not a disease. This is assimilation." He paused, swallowing hard as he looked at the microscope slides in front of him. The samples, once inert under containment, now pulsed with life, growing and shifting even as he watched. "We've been thinking about this all wrong. This isn't just one planet's life form. It's part of a system, a species. Gliese 581G isn't a world. It's a womb, a nursery, and we're the midwives. It's using us to spread itself, to seed the galaxy." Locke's recording was interrupted by the sound of footsteps, or something like footsteps, echoing down the corridor outside the lab. The infected were close. Their voices, now a chorus of overlapping tones, reverberated through the walls. "The womb will open. The children will be born. The galaxy will kneel." Locke scrambled to secure the lab door, sealing himself inside. His mind raced as he tried to focus on the task at hand. He had one chance to stop this. The Horizon Dawn's black box was still intact, and if he could get a message to Earth, a real warning with data that couldn't be ignored, then maybe humanity would stand a chance. He quickly uploaded everything he had: images of the infected, recordings of the chanting, biological scans of the transforming cells, and the high-resolution images of the planet's surface. But it wasn't enough. "They won't believe it," he muttered to himself. "Not unless they see it for themselves." And then he had an idea, a desperate, reckless idea. Locke activated the Horizon Dawn's external scanners, aligning them with the planet's surface. Deep within the swirling storms of green and amber, the vast biological structures pulsed in perfect harmony, their rhythm matching the planet's heartbeat. He enhanced the images, pushing the sensors to their limit. What he saw chilled him to his core. The structures were connected by enormous, glowing tendrils, each one leading to a central mass buried deep within the planet's core. The mass was enormous, larger than any city on Earth, and it pulsed with a sickly, greenish light. It wasn't just alive. It was aware, and it was watching him. Locke felt it then, a pressure in his mind, like cold fingers digging into his thoughts. The presence of the planet, the mother, was undeniable. It wasn't just observing him. It was inside him, unraveling his mind as easily as a child pulling apart threads. "You cannot stop this," the voice whispered, resonating through his skull. It wasn't coming from the infected outside the door. It was coming from everywhere. "We are inevitable. The galaxy will kneel before the children of the womb." Locke staggered back from the console, clutching his head. He knew he didn't have much time. The infection was already spreading through him. He could feel it in the sharp, stabbing pains behind his eyes, in the way his skin prickled as if something was crawling beneath it. With trembling hands, he activated the black box's launch sequence. The probe, designed to survive any conditions, would jettison from the ship and send its data directly back to Earth. It was humanity's only hope. But as the countdown began, the lab door buckled. The infected were breaking through. The door collapsed inward and they flooded into the lab. Twisted, monstrous forms that had once been his colleagues crawled toward him, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Aiden Locke," they said in unison, their voices layered and distorted. "The mother welcomes you. Join us. Be reborn." Locke backed away, his eyes darting to the black box console. The countdown was at 10 seconds. "I'm not joining you," he growled, his voice shaking but resolute. "Not today." He grabbed a vial from the lab bench, a concentrated sample of the planet's biological matter, sealed in a reinforced glass cylinder. He'd been studying it for days, trying to find its weakness, and now it would serve one final purpose. As the infected closed in, Locke hurled the vial at the floor. It shattered, releasing a burst of green mist that filled the room instantly. The creatures recoiled, their bodies spasming as the concentrated biological material overwhelmed them. Locke staggered toward the console, his vision blurring as the mist seeped into his lungs. He felt his body beginning to change, the infection accelerating. 5 seconds. He slammed his hand down on the launch button, and the black box fired into space, rocketing away from the doomed ship. The last thing Locke saw before he collapsed was the infected turning their gaze upward, their mouths splitting into grotesque smiles. "It is done," they said, their voices triumphant. "The womb will open. The children will spread." Locke closed his eyes, his body consumed by the transformation. But in his final moments, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. The black box was gone, carrying his message across the void. Maybe, just maybe, humanity would listen this time. The black box arrived at Earth 6 months later, its data decrypted by the United Interstellar Authority. The recordings from the Horizon Dawn were undeniable, and for the first time, humanity understood the scale of the threat. But it was already too late. The first signs were subtle, unexplained phenomena on the outskirts of colonized space, ships disappearing near the Gliese system, reports of strange dreams among colonists. Then came the sightings. Massive organic structures appearing on moons and asteroids, their tendrils spreading like roots. The infection had begun. Gliese 581G wasn't just a womb. It was a harbinger, the first of many, and its children were already here.